control 60 to 70% of an operating company's budget. So if that's the case, you hear the term about the most prized asset. So if that's the case, how do we manage that asset and how do we drive success within the organization? So as I said, this is a certified course we normally would run. It's basically a 2-day course. So what I've done is to condense that into 1 hour. So as I said, we'll walk through the context and then we'll pick it up from there. So here's the question: is your organization fit for the future? So when I say fit for the future, what does your financials look like? As a profit company, financials is a key to driving it. What is the total revenue for your organization last year? What is the number one revenue generating product? Where is your organization headed? Is it headed for the future, or is it just kind of a standing still? No organization today can basically stand still. You have to move towards the future state of the industry and the future state of your organization, trying to get to that pivotal point. So the key to that is understanding business. And one of the things I tell HR people is that we have to focus on the business. It's not so much as an HR process admin, because with the advent of AI, a lot of that work is going to go away. I read an article the other week that said it's about a 5-year lifespan of admin and process skills. So if that's the case, how are you going to get connected to the organization in a way that you can drive the success of the organization? How do you get your organization fit for the future? Because that is what it's going to be about. Every industry today is going through a major shift. I have some examples here, and it talks about the transformation. I received an email. I was in Munich last week doing a certified session on strategic workforce planning. And as I got on the flight, I noticed there was an email that came through, and there's a bank in the US, a major bank called TD Bank. And TD Bank is closing 90 branches. 90 branches. And when you read into the article, they say the reason for that is the digital transformation of banking. So if you think of that, if they're going from retail to cloud, that's a new workforce, because you may not have those job families and building a cloud or a digital-based approach. In retail banking, you've got tellers, customer service, branch managers, and possibly an HR person, one per 3 to 4 branches. So if that's changing to cloud banking, what is our strategy? What is our strategy if that's changing to cloud banking? How will we get into that room and present the organization with a plan to move forward? Strategic workforce planning. So just take a look at all of these, and I'll share the slides with everyone. If you're in an industry now, the industry is headed in a different direction than where you are today, which means that we have to always be on point in understanding the business context, because that's important. So one of the questions I'd like to ask HR people is, do you know your organization strategy? And when I ask that on a live presentation, what normally happens, I will get maybe 2, 3 hands go up. I don't get a lot of hands going up. So in other words, you're working in an organization, you're in charge of the most prized asset, but you don't know where the organization is headed. So how can you present a talent management plan to the organization that's going to allow them to get that success? That's the easy way to figure this out. If you're in an industry, you should create a Google alert on the industry. So if I'm in retail banking, Google alert on retail banking. And every time there's a research report, a case study, anything that's written on the web, you're going to get a copy of it. And you have to stay laser focused on the industry. Now, the reason I say that is because lots of times in organizations, and as I mentioned earlier, you ask HR people, what is the organization strategy? They don't know that. So if you don't know that, one way you can get ahead of the curve is that you follow the industry and you work from that vantage point. One of the other key points is that how often are HR people sitting in those business meetings at the end of the month? Everything is discussed. If you are a publicly traded company, there is no excuse because you can listen to the earnings call. So I say all this to say we have to become students of the industry, students of our business, and students of our workforce. In other words, what that means is that we monitor and take a look at everything that's percolating inside of the industry to drive it forward. HR is at a pivotal point as an industry. The turnover rate for CHROs post-COVID nationwide was almost 70% post-COVID. And one of the key findings of that was that they needed a more strategic approach to human resources, not just a normal HR process admin. I don't mean to say that in a negative light, but I mean to say that the skills that were needed for that may not be needed for the future state. Now, I know some of you may have wanted to go to training and your company would not budget or would not have that in the budget to send you out for a training. That's okay. You can Google alerts. You can do webinars the same way this is done, and you can self-develop as opposed to sitting around waiting for the opportunity to go to a 2 or 3 day certification and you get your plaque and put it on the wall. It's going to take more than that today because the business is changing that much. So the other key point is that what is the organization strategy? Where is the organization headed? Where is it headed? What is your strategy? Because your strategy is going to drive the success of the organization. Why is that? Because you're people focused. People focused means that I take strategy and I build a people approach. One of the terms I always started to use today was someone says, "What type of work do you do?" I said, "I'm a workforce architect." So when I say that, I can see the heads turning, the mind trying to figure out what is a workforce architect. I said, we take business strategy and we design workforce solutions for that. So that's an architect. We take your plans from upstairs, I'll say upstairs, and we take that and we devise a strategic workforce plan for the organization's success. We take a look at our SWOT analysis. How many of you have ever looked at your organization's SWOT? SWOT will tell you what the organization sees as major stumbling blocks to get to the other side. So if we understand industry, if we understand business strategy, if we understand strategic goals, we become the architect because we take that and we build an approach to that. Now, we're going to go through the model that I use, but it's understanding the context and why this is so important today. We have to become business focused. I always say create a brand is that you're business first, HR second. Business first means that I can sit in those meetings and I can understand exactly what they're talking about because what's percolating in my mind is that how do I create a people solution for this challenge as to where the organization is headed. That's on us. The CEO, C-suite, whoever is not going to come to us and say, we need you to do this, we need you to upskill. They're not going to do that. In a lot of cases, when it goes back to the 70% turnover, that was the reason it was done because of the fact they needed different skills in human resources. 5-year lifespan. And I'm just giving you research that's out there. So all this means is that we have to play a different role and we have to upskill ourselves and not depend on the org's budget to upskill us. But the more we become cognizant of all the minutiae that faces an organization, what we can do is offer architectural solutions. We can come into that room and we can provide our solutions to that. We're no different than the other functions because when the organization says we want to go here, 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 someone from finance, marketing, technology is going to be in that room and they're going to give their interpretation of it as to how they're going to take their function and get to the other side. And we'll see how that plays out in just a bit. Here's what it looks like. Current state, future state. In the middle, strategy. Strategy at plural. Business model changes, mergers and acquisitions, location strategy, business disruptions, you name it. So what do? We take all of that and we come back and we put together our people strategy, workforce architect, strategic workforce planning, change management, strategic talent acquisition, and it goes on and on. We can't dictate as to what's coming towards us, but if we learn the skills, the key skills to that is to drive organization's success. And that slide that I showed you, is your organization fit for the future? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Because that's on us to drive and build the bridge to get to the proverbial other side. In other words, future state success. What would it look like? What is our strategic talent acquisition strategy? What are the strategic role analysis that we're going to need? How do we segment a workforce into 4 key categories, which we'll talk about in just a bit? And it goes on, and it's not going to stop, because disruption and change is the new normal. And one of the things that COVID kind of flipped the script was that there is no normalcy anymore. Every industry organization is going through a major shift, and they're trying to figure out, how are we going to do this? Well, it comes from us because we're that architect. We take business strategy and we align it to we align it to the strategy of the business, and we come back and build our plan around the wheel. The wheel is the human capital strategy. All of that's ours. Because if you don't know business strategy and you're just doing HR people stuff, you're not connecting to the business. You're not connecting to the industry. You're not connecting to where the future of the organization is headed. And the more you can fine tune that, the higher probability of success as it relates to business results. And this is how the new thinking is in strategic workforce planning. It is one of the most sought after topics on the market today. As I said, I was in Munich last week. At the end of the month, I'm in Brussels, and then I leave Brussels to go to Amsterdam. What is this certification? It's strategic workforce planning, where we dig deep into understanding strategy and trying to design a workforce aligned to that. That's going to be the key. So our role is trying to break it down from strategy, but I'm gonna walk you through a little process we work through. As I said, I'm trying to condense two days into an hour. Strategy cascade looks like this. A company's strategy, a banking strategy, is offer digital banking services in addition to traditional banking. That's their strategy. So you take strategy 1, strategy 2, strategy 3. They could have 3 or 4. A quick way to think about it is this. Who owns strategy 1? What function owns the vast majority of strategy 1? So just taking a look at this, I could say technology could be driving that, or somewhere in that technology function is driving the move from the bank on the corner to the bank in the cloud. What workforce would be needed to make sure we achieve the goals we set, our KPIs, for our digital banking over 2 years or 3 years? Because strategy is based on not next year, but 2 to 3 years out. Next stop, business function activities. What does each business unit need to do to execute the strategy? Here's where we come in, because we need to understand whether it's the digitalization piece is owned by technology, whoever it's owned by. The marketing people is going to have to change their marketing, because it's not anymore talking about the bank on the corner. Now we can talk about on the web. I can do 1, 2, and 3. I can do everything from here. This is why if you call up a company today, one of the things they will tell you is that use our app. Have you used our app? Use the app. You can do chat. You can do all these things. This is move away from the banks. That's over with. But how does a bank build a workforce? That is strategic workforce planning. So another way to look at it is that think of every piece of strategy as a bus. Go back to the bridge. Strategy 1, 2, 3, future state here. Who owns the vast majority of this strategy on product innovation? Strategy number 2, who owns that as a business function? Strategy number 3, if there's another strategy beyond that, who owns that? And who will be in charge of providing a solution, people, to the organization, to the leaders inside of the organization? And it looks like this. What is the SWP strategy? Are the strategic roles that have been identified as needed to accomplish this strategy? Because job families are going to be important as it relates to this. That's kind of a quick overview of how strategy cascades down through an organization. So in the 2-day session that we do, we delve into case studies behind case studies. We look at relocation strategy. We look at business disruption and say design a workforce. But we give you the skills to do that. So one of the key points of strategic workforce planning is this. If you learn how to interpret business disruption or whatever strategy is, you can look at any situation and you begin that mindset of shifting as to how are we going to approach this. Because at some point in time, there's going to be a meeting, and everyone in that meeting is going to come in with a plan. Operation strategy, technology strategy, financial strategy, marketing strategy. What's ours? What is ours? You could call it talent management strategy. I say strategic workforce planning because strategic workforce planning was based and designed on the strategy of the organization. And this is why it is key in our context of business today. You have to be aware of how do you drive this. Now, I want to say this in a nice way because sometimes in your organization, maybe the key leaders aren't sort of clued into what strategic workforce planning looks like. And this is why if you had to think about the trajectory of human resources, the first pillar of that is strategic workforce planning, because you take strategy and you build a possible solution to that. Remember the slide I just showed you, business strategy, people strategy. There's no way to get around it. That's there. And they're looking for possible solutions to that. And if you're not giving those solutions, the company is just drifting along and we're kind of crossing our fingers and hoping that it will work. So here's the model. We'll go through the model now. So we set up the context of it. So we'll go through the model. So this is the kind of what I call the recipe. So if you cook or you bake or whatever it is, you get a recipe and you try it. And then you try it and you say, maybe I need to change and add a little more of this ingredient, take a little more of this out. So think in terms of a strategic workforce planning model, because there's a whole lot of different approaches to it. But for the most part, it's going to be encapsulated in what we have here. You notice the first one up top, business strategy. So here's kind of a key. You can't do strategic workforce planning if you don't know what strategy is. And if you don't know what strategy is, you're kind of and you're coming back to an organization with a plan, you're guessing. Simple as that. You don't have any evidence to base any of that on, because you're basically guessing. But business strategy, I need to understand what that is. I just showed you the strategy cascade and how that entire workforce is going to be designed around that. And then you walk into the next most important process, which is included in every SWP model, is segmentation of roles. What job families are going to be instrumental in driving the success of that particular strategy? And then we look at environmental scan industry. What is happening outside? Where are we headed, future state? And then it comes down to current state analysis, the DNA of a workforce. I'll get into these in just a bit. And then we look at scenario planning. Scenario planning says if we're going to stay where we are and we're going to keep moving. Think of Kodak. Kodak stayed where they are and they basically went out of business. Well, they moved into a different business model. Think of BlackBerry. If you did not have a BlackBerry when phones were just coming into their own, you were not even considered as a business person. But where are they now? They didn't adapt to the future state of the telecom or the mobile industry. And they chose one scenario. So normally in the process of scenario planning and working with the people upstairs, you're trying to figure out where is this headed? And if we look at 4 options and we choose one, then we build a workforce around that. So scenario planning looks at it through that lens. One of the things I've noticed over the past couple of years since COVID, you see so many stores that are going out of business. I always tend to look at headlines, business headlines, and I ask why. So in the retail sector, you see these major brands at one time, they're gone. Why? Because they chose scenarios that did not work. And they said, we'll just continue opening stores. I'll give you an example of that. The fast food industry. During COVID, they had a 70% increase in revenue. Think of that. McDonald's, Burger King, all those places, a 70% increase in revenue. There was a reason for that. Does anyone know what that is? What was the reason that you had so much increase in revenue during a time period where the vast majority of fast food restaurants were closed? Can anyone unmute themselves and tell me? Take
Because
a guess.
people are sitting at home and they will eat more. So they will order more food.
They will order more food from here. Exactly. So if that's the case, how do you build a workforce around that? How do you build a strategic approach to that? That means I need digitization people. That means I need app developers. That means I need a different way of doing food. Because one of the things that came out of that study was that I don't need if I'm McDonald's, I don't need to open up 50 more restaurants. I can maybe open 3 in strategic locations, and I create what's called a ghost kitchen. And the ghost kitchen was I go into a factory district, I create a McDonald's, but it's not for people to come in. It's for creating food. You're making food, and what do you do when it's finished? You give it to the Uber Eats, you give it to Kareem Eats, or whatever it is, and these are the people that take it to the client. So my entire business model has changed for fast food. So when I showed you the industry analysis, how it's flipping, we have to be in on that, because if McDonald's says, okay, we're going to do a 50% decrease in opening stores, and we're going to do a 25% decrease in 25% increase in closing locations. Where's the workforce for the other side to make sure we can fill all those orders? This is where it comes from. So scenario planning, and then we look at the gap. So the gap is basically current state to scenario. Once it's chosen, and current state, what do we have and what do we don't have? And then we go to action planning and monitoring. So let's walk through a little bit of each one. Business strategy alignment. What is the organization strategy? That's the key. If you don't know that, you're guessing and hoping that it will work. And your people upstairs know that you don't know what you're talking about. Do I understand what strategy is? Can I walk you through a presentation, an evidence-based presentation, where I walk you through strategy, where I walk you through where we're headed, and I take each piece of strategy and I break it down to you, and I educate the room into workforce design or workforce architecture. It's a recipe for organizational health. It ensures that talent strategies are integrated into the overall business strategy. If that's the anchor, and if I don't know that, I've got to take a step back. And then we talk about role segmentation. Which roles will be aligned to the org strategy? I use the metaphor of the bus. Think of each piece of strategy. If you've got 3 pieces of strategy, who's on bus 1, who's on bus 2, who's on bus 3, who's driving the bus on 1 strategic role, 2, 3. Who are the people sitting on the bus? That could be core roles, that could be supporting roles, that could be IT, that could be HR. It depends upon that. But here's the key. Concentrate on the strategic roles. If McDonald's says that we're gonna open up 70% fewer locations or sell 70% fewer locations, what is strategic role that's needed for that? Because it may no longer be the real estate person who was scouting out strategic locations. Because now it's going to all be done in the so-called cloud and ghost kitchens. Who's supporting, who's core, who's misaligned? Misaligned is when you read the papers over the past year, there's been possibly 200,000 layoffs in the tech industry. Why was that? Was because the skill set was not there. The engineers, in a lot of cases, did not have the skills and capabilities to move forward. I just read that Intel hired a new CEO, and the key positioning of that new CEO for Intel was to develop chips that were more AI aligned. So as they laid people off, the skill set wasn't there, and they needed to bring in a new level of people that needed a new skill that was aligned to AI. See how everything trickles down? And one of the other ways that you can stay developed is that read business headlines, read the business section of your newsfeed. I always ask people, and I said, how many of you daily, no, weekly or daily, look at a business headline and say, oh, wow, so and so laid off 5,000 people? Hmm. Here's a thought. It's called scenario planning. Put yourselves in the position of that CHRO, or you're in talent acquisition, or whatever you're in, and say, what would be my approach to a solution or the future state after the layoffs? Because the layoffs are misaligned people. And what are three key things I would work from? I do this daily. I look at a situation and I'll say three possible approaches, one, two, three. And then I'm done for the day. So when I showed you, is your organization fit for the future? Are you fit for the future as to where it's headed? And that means a little bit every day. So it showed the gym. Do you go to the gym 3 days a week? Do you go to the gym 5 days a week? You go once a week, and then I don't go anymore. In this particular case today, you are going to have to stay in mental shape for organizational dynamics and people dynamics of the organization. You're the architect. And then it says environmental scan. What is the future state of the industry? If you're working in an industry and the industry is headed towards point B, what is that? Do you know what that is? You follow your industry, you put it you put in a Google alert for industry, and it'll tell you exactly what it is. And how do you read through that and start interpreting? So when I say I look at a headline, I go one, two, three. And that may take me 5 minutes. I mean, make a note here, make a note there. What would I do if I was there? If I was in charge of that, what would be my strategy when it comes back to the big room and I got to present a possible solution to that? So every time I see layoffs or a new business they're moving into, I read an article about Starbucks had decided in the US to open up charging stations for customers coming in on interstate highways that needed to get a charge and maybe coffee or maybe have a meeting inside. Starbucks decided, let's try putting in charging stations. That's a strategic initiative. How are you going to build that out? You can't have the barista coming out fixing the charger when it doesn't work. How do you build that out? What are three key things you would look for? What is the charging industry? What are the key strategic roles in the charging industry? And it just goes on and on. And then we look at the current state analysis. I love current state analysis because I'm kind of we also do a course that's called people analytics. In other words, how do you break down people analytics? And this is available through Simfotix. Is that how do you understand the DNA of an organization? What is the average age? What is the gender breakdown? What is the average tenure per job family? Challenge here. What particular part of the job families does it fall under? When you begin to look at and analyze data, and I can go to the big room and present, I'm giving you an evidence-based approach. And all that means is that if I provide you with a solution and a presentation, I have numbers to back it up. I'm not coming in there and just guessing and because of some best practice that worked someplace in a different country. Understanding the current state of analysis. We did a project in Saudi Arabia where we spent time and we looked at every strategic role. And I can share this. Through this session today. And we looked at every strategic role and we broke it down into categories. We looked at every possible data point as it relates to that, or data sets as it's called. That's the DNA of a workforce. And human resources today is moving towards evidence-based approach. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a statistician. It does not mean you are going to have to be not only a statistician, but understand how to do regression analysis, linear regression. No. understanding the key points. What is the gender breakdown of your organization? Does the gender breakdown align with where the DEI strategy is, or how do we move into that particular area? What is our sourcing strategy for computer engineers? What is our social strategy for digital marketers? If we look at digital markets, where do they come from? What is the next certification they need? How do we consistently develop those? So one of the things you do is that your current state analysis, you look at current state strategic roles, because sometimes that can shift. But when you move into the strategy piece of future state, you have to start thinking about, how do I take it to the next level and understand the current state strategic roles and future state strategic roles. And then I look at the numbers. What are the numbers percolated? Do we close at the end of the month? I always liked a financial approach. They close everything down at the end of the month. And then they look at numbers. What's moving? Why is that number moving? Turnover is high here. Why is this moving here? I had a situation, to give you a little background. I worked for IBM, Xerox, and I also worked for Martha Stewart in New York for about 10 years. I started as a trainer, ended up vice president of human resources. But one morning I came in and someone told me that someone had resigned. And I said, I remember hearing this a few weeks back that another person had resigned. And I said, could someone run me a report as to the number of resignations? And I knew the young lady that resigned had just come back from maternity leave. And I said, I want to look at people that was out on maternity leave and what was the rate of people in that data set that resigned. And the numbers came 100%. We got a problem. So when you monitor numbers, you have to figure out, if I figure something and there's a thread to it, how do I begin the process of solving that? Because we're the ones in charge of people strategy. And we have to figure out how that happens. But anyway, we went through a process and we were able to solve it. How did we solve it? We brought all of those people in. We created focus groups around them and asked them, why is this happening? So one of the other key things, and this is from the consultancy side, is that you're the in-house consultant for the organization. So when the people numbers percolate in an area that's not safe, you have to figure that out, because that's impacting organizational health. That was a major job family, because the major job family inside of Martha Stewart was designers. So if we needed designers for future state, we have to figure this out. And then we look at scenario planning. Which area are we going to pursue? Now, this is kind of nebulous here because of the fact that we're not going to probably be on in those discussions, but here's how you can use that. If you were to go back to work and you were to ask inside of your organization, who creates strategy? Going back to business strategy. Can I sit down with that person and get a better understanding of what strategy is? One young lady told me, she said, I asked the head of strategy that I wanted to have this kind of workshop, and you come in and you share to the HR team. And his response was this: why would HR need to understand what business strategy is? And I'm like, you're talking about misaligned? He doesn't even understand the impact of that. So I say, if you get a response like that, could you go back to the people strategy, business strategy, people strategy? We're architects. We need to know what your plan is in order to build out what we need. And this is why this has happened. So scenario planning is normally done through 4 quadrants. Perfect state, not a perfect state, we can't stay here, or whatever it is. And the organization will figure out, based on that, as to how strategy is done. It's a great workshop. The young lady said that it was the greatest workshop that she had ever done. And then once it was done, and the question, the interaction between the so-called strategy department, they were extremely impressed that HR was even trying to get a better understanding of that. But not only that, but the strategy people said, oh my God, we love the fact that you're doing this. Let's stay closer together and we can work together to do this, which means consult and collaborate. So the other key points of this is that gap analysis, current state, future state. What are the gaps that we need to close? So if you identify the gaps, what is the workforce solution to that? Now, we're kind of walking through kind of a high level and going through this, but it gets a lot deeper inside of a session. And then action planning comes up, KPIs, talent strategy, SWP strategy, communication strategy throughout the organization. What is it going to look like? What are the KPIs we're going to develop as it relates to that? And how will we measure it? What is our cadence? Is it weekly, monthly? It has to be, for the most part, monthly. Go back to finance. Finance says every month we're going to close everything down and we're going to look at our numbers. And one of the other questions I asked on the live session, I said, how many of your HR departments close at the end of the month and you crunch every number? You crunch every KPI and you look at it as a test. You go to the doctor once a year for a physical. All that's done through numbers. They look at numbers and say, oh, this is high because the average of this is here. We have a problem here. We got a problem here. And so here's a possible solution to that. It's the same thing. So when we think of how we take all of this, it means that we're going to rethink our mindset and this strategic workforce planning. It is so interesting because you're consistently trying to put together a puzzle. And with AI and the disruption of AI, it is on warp speed today. And I have a slide that we're going to cover, just kind of give you an overview of that. So the benefits of strategic workforce planning: alignment, people, business. It has to be, because if it's not, you're just putting together a solution, or you're just doing business the same way you've been doing that. Competencies. What is a competency needed for new leaders? If you had to hire, I go back to the banking situation. If you had to hire digital bankers, what would be the competencies for those new computer engineers you're hiring, or whatever the job family is? Did the competencies change? Are you still using a viable competency structure, or you just inherited one and you've been using it and you never updated it? Competencies change, specifically for new roles. How do you upskill yourselves as well as an HR department? You have to upskill today. Trust me. Lifespan. This came from Davos. That was one of the findings of Davos. The lifespan of current skills is 5 years. Think of it, 5 years. 5 years. That's how much time you have. Now, sometimes that may be a little longer, whatever it is. And then it talks to, is it evidence-based? Do I have numbers? Do I have numbers to walk you through the process or the solution? Otherwise, I'm guessing. So if you don't have it, you're guessing. And then how do we embed SWP into the process? So if we look at to see first quarter numbers were down, and maybe they're taking a tweak on whatever it is, what is our strategic workforce plan solution to that? Do we reduce head? I don't want to say head count. Do we reduce our focus on a specific role, or do we say, can we borrow people from here? And that goes through kind of the bees process, that we build, buy, borrow, and all those kinds of things. So each one of these builds up the workforce. And it's basically taking a workforce and putting it on steroids, because we're under the hood looking at everything. There's no one else inside of the organization that has those skills. Now, I came across this the other day, and I really want you to think of this and look at the traditional process. Strategic workforce planning, people analytics, TA. It goes on and on. Traditional process, and then it flips it down to AI enhanced. If you're not into this whole AI piece, and I know lots of times people not, someone told me, I was in Malaysia, and they said, no, we banned AI, we banned Chat GPT in our organization. And I'm like, oh my God, are you serious? We banned it because we want people to be, don't even get me started on that one. Start digging into the AI approach to strategic workforce planning. Because you can put in scenarios. I don't need to do the old way of scenario planning. Start digging into strategic talent acquisition based on certain roles. Can you give me a breakdown as to how we source those roles, whatever it is? Can you give me a marketing campaign? You can do all of that, and it's done. I can still do that the old way, but I can do that. And I've got a framework to start from that gives me so much more time, because within an hour, I've got a possible framework and building it forward. So take a look at this slide here, because this kind of walks it through that. So AI on workforce skills is going to be huge. The emerging skills that's coming, the obsolete skills that are basically on their way out. And I know the analogy here, fax machine operator. Remember fax machines? Think of the companies that designed fax machines. What was the scenario planning as it related to fax machines? Are we moving towards that? Can we just send an email and do everything through that? What are the skills gap? Not only skills gap for people, think of factory workers. At one time, you had factories that had 3 shifts, 8 to 4, 4 to 12, 12 to 8, 3 shifts. No longer. Why? Because everything, for the most part, in industries, if it's manufacturing, it's robotics. But if it's robotics, future state, that means we need robotics engineers, robotics mechanics, robotics calibration people, and it just goes on and on because that's a new workforce, that's a new strategy, and a new workforce that pulls in, beyond that. So a couple of cases. One S&P 500 companies, they view their workforce as a strategic asset. So think about how a company makes investments because they're looking for a strong ROI. If you're working through the premise of strategic workforce planning, you can now determine where to invest because which roles are going to derive uh, more ROI than another role. I can look at my job families. I can look at my job families under a category of the strategic plan and do that. Scenario-based forecasting, 1, 2, 3, 4. Which one did you choose, and how do you approach forecasting? How do you approach supply and demand? If you're in talent acquisition, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If we're moving towards an AI approach or whatever it is, we may realize that that particular job family is a hot job and everybody's competing. Can we compete because of compensation? Can we complete because we are a great place to work, which I was the former CEO of Great Place to Work here in Dubai. And then we look through internal talent development. Here's a way of looking at that. And I ask HR people this: what is their internal external ratio? Internal mobility ratio. And all that means is that if you hired 100 people last year, how many of those people were homegrown? And how many of those people that you chose from outside? If you chose outside, there's a 30% increase. There's a lot of negatives when you go outside and hire key talent. First of all, it's going to cost you more. But if you look at developing your own people, if you were to reduce, say 70% of the people you looked at last year came from outside. If you look at the cost differential of going outside and inside, and look at a cost savings, if we could reduce it by 50%, what would be the cost savings of that? I got evidence, and we start developing our own people. So when we need people, we choose here, and we're able to put someone here. Think of it this way. If you brought me in for whatever role, say a senior level role, it's going to take me 6 months to even understand the landscape. I got to understand who to talk to. I got to understand not only who to talk to, how do I navigate leadership, who's the key player. I got to try to figure out all of that. It takes 6 months, based on research, for the person outside to become relevant inside. 6 months. If you were to promote me from here, and I've been here for 2, 3 years and move here, I can hit the ground on Monday morning and get right into what needs to be done because I understand the culture, I understand the people, I understand leadership navigation, which is a key component for leadership development. So it all comes back in making that approach. So internal redeployment is cool today because a lot of companies have said, let's start developing our own people. That's going to reduce turnover because people are being invested in. They say, you know what, I'm going to say this company sends us out to get certification. They're always trying to bring us in to try and solve these problems. We feel that we're being listened to. Reskilling initiative, again, training employees as to what the future state could look like. Upskilling, HR, you're here. How do you upskill an HR person that's in administrative process into understanding more of L&D, understanding more of competent men? How do you consistently upskill HR departments? HR departments, and I'm going to say this in a nice way, in significant need of upskilling. I work all over the world. HR departments are in serious need of upskilling. That has nothing to do with you. The industry is just moving forward. And for you to be relevant, you're going to have to upskill, whether it's on your own, through your own budget, or through the org's budget. And then we come back to talent acquisition. What are the strategies driving it forward? And then you look at data-driven hiring. If we were to combine AI into those processes, all of this kind of comes out to approach. So as we begin to wind down here, I need each one of you, to think about make your organization fit for the future. But not only that, but rethink your skill set. Do I need to upskill my skill set? Because the organization and the industry is moving at warp speed. And if I still holding on to what I came in and was doing in HR, all of those vast period of time, I'm not equipping myself for the future. I'm not looking at how am I going to develop into the roles that's going to be needed. If I'm looking at 10 to 15, 20 more years of working, and I may need to do a rethink as to how am I going to self-develop. With the internet today, you can self-develop. You can listen to seminars the way that we're doing here now. You can listen to webinars across. You could follow certain companies. Uh, Korn Ferry. It's a whole list of companies that you should be following. Um, I went blank there for a minute, but it's a whole list of companies that we should be following to try and get a better understanding of where not only our skill set is moving towards, but understanding industry transformation and understanding the design that we need from our side. So I need HR people to get fit for the future, which means that I need each one of you to take it upon yourselves to start moving to the so-called next phase of how we're going to make this work. And with that, I want to close it out and leave some time for Q&A. If anyone has any questions, we can talk through those now, because I'm sure you probably do. I tried to condense 2 days of work into an hour, so I think I covered the key points. So I want to open it up for QA. Anyone have any thoughts? Just unmute yourselves. I think we have, how much official time do we have? Is it 9 minutes, 10 minutes, or 7? Okay. Can someone, if you have a question, just raise your hand and unmute yourself. Going once, going twice. Okay.
Hi,
Go
Ron.
ahead.
Ron, thank you
Hey.
so much for the wonderful session. I don't have a question.
Mm,
Basically, I have a feedback.
okay.
I think, this requires more than 1 hour because it was very detailed and, we went a little too fast. There were certain areas I believe which could have been touched upon more,
Hmm.
especially because I come from digital background. I point the way that was being discussed. It could have taken a couple of more use cases to actually discuss at length.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. But a
But
valid point. Go ahead.
for me, I believe the session was pretty productive.
Mm.
A bit too concise, but really happy with the session.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my feedback to that is yes, it was, because I struggle over the past week of trying to condense 2 days into an hour. So my thought was, if I covered the context as to why it's needed, and then I could cover the key points of the model. And that's what I had to work through. So it's always that way when you do a webinar. You're trying to pick up what key points would you want to dig a little deeper. And in introducing yourself, you talk through a data-driven background or digitization background. Could we have done more to do that? Yeah, we could have. But here's my key thought. Focus on the strategy. Focus on understanding the key drivers as to where your organization is headed, and everything is going to kind of trickle down from there. Key is that you must know what strategy is, and then you take it from there and you build out that piece. This is why I said if you use the concept of the architect, and one of the things that I used to travel a lot more during COVID, and sometimes you're on a flight, somebody was sitting next to you, they said, "What do you do?" I would never tell anyone I worked in HR. I would always say I'm a workforce architect, and I knew right away the way that they would look at me when they responded to that. They would say, "What is a workforce architect?" And when they gave me that, I said, "You have workforce architects inside of your organization?" No, I don't. I know the major roles we have. We have no such title as HR as a workforce architect. I said, "You have an HR department?" "Yeah, we have an HR department." I said, "Those are your workforce architects." So I'm not going to tell you what the response would be from them because they didn't look at HR in that light. So when I talk about this transformation, we have to become transformative in our skill set so the entire organization understands this is our role and this is what we're skilled at, and we drive org solutions through people. So in a lot of cases, that has to be sold to the people upstairs because they don't view us in that strategic light. But thank you so much for that. Thank you for the feedback. But it's tough. It's tough to condense. Thank you. Anyone else? Ahmed.
Yes, Ron, thank you. Ron, you mentioned something about a company blocked the chat GPT, right?
Yeah.
So if you wanted to convince them to use it, how you will approach them regarding this?
So one of the key things that we always work on, can you make a business case presentation as to why this is important? So I can talk through productivity. Time to solution is going to be a lot shorter because
Yeah.
the chat GPT is not I take it here and I run with it here. There was a big case in US. A lawyer was trying to figure out an approach and he used chat GPT and they used a reference to a lawsuit that no one had ever filed. And he presented that and he was kind of called out. And as a result of that, he was fired. So here's a thought on chat GPT. Can I walk you through time to solution? Can I walk you through the number of scenarios that if we were to work through, you and I and the whole team here were working through a possible solution, it could possibly take us 2-3 days of going back and forth, looking through this. But what if we could do a quick chat GPT analysis and we kept going back and forth? In one day, we can get a concise, basic version, and then we take that, and that's our starting point in one day. And then we can keep coming back to that. I can walk you through that approach if you're the audience for that. So think of this. If you're trying to sell an idea, create a business case presentation. And all a business case presentation says, I'm going to educate you as to why this is important and the approach we're going to use and what it means for the organization, because that's all they're concerned with. So it has to be based on business case. If you do a chat GPT, business case presentation for strategic workforce planning, why or why not? And you kept asking questions. At the end of that so-called experience, you're going to get a good starting point. So one of the things we do in every session that I do, we always work on business case presentation. Always think of 3 themes that you would work from to give those 3 themes to the audience group. So when you go to the big, I call it the big room, can you make an impact? And anytime you give a business focused presentation, you're not going deep, you're going high level, you're walking through strategy, but you want them to walk away with key findings from that. So even if they don't agree with you 100% that meeting, you gave them something to think about. In other words, you're planting the seed and hoping that it will grow. Okay, cool.
Yes, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else? Because I think we're running up on
Thank
the.
you.
Okay. Anyone else? If not, you want to close it out? Is Quasi here or who's?
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for the wonderful session.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can see that the participants are giving very good feedback.
Good.
So I also would like to ask you to share the QR code that No shared with you for the feedback form. Yeah. I have
Okay. Could
also
you
sent
share
the
that?
link.
Because yeah.
No
Can you do
problem.
it?
No problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
do that. I'll do that.
Alrighty. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I really appreciate it, and we'll stay in touch. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can follow the travails of strategic workforce planning across the globe. As I said, at the end of the month, I'm in Brussels, and then I flip back to Amsterdam. So those are the key things for me this month at the end of the month. So take care and stay in touch. Okay.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.